Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. For today's little workshop I thought we'd have fun and create a bookmark with some little turtles on it, made completely out of polymer clay. They're nice and flexible once they've been baked and nice and thin enough that they will go in a book. You can make a larger turtle so you just have one, or a small one swimming by himself, or what I'm going to do for you today, which is having the two turtles. As always with my tutorials, I'm going to show you how to do the complex patterns and the blends and everything else, but you don't have to. You can make them as simplified as you want. For instance, you could have just a simple plain colour of blue in the background, simple plain colour of the seaweed reeds, simple just blocks of colours for the shells, and then something very similar for the face and bodies as well. But I'll show you how I do it, and then it's up to you to decide how much detail or not you want to go into. So let's start with the equipment. So for today's project, you'll need a polymer clay blade. I sometimes refer to these as the tissue blades, a craft knife, a polymer clay roller, a cocktail stick. You need some tool that's going to help you smush the clay at some stage. Now you can use something like this cable needle if it's got a nice sort of blunted end. You can use one of these, which is a Staler Fimo tool for sort of pressing down, and there's loads of other tools you can get with something similar, just something that's going to press down. But I'm actually going to use one of these today, which has got a little flat foot, and that's just from a normal sort of sculpting set, but it just helps to smush the clay and press it around. To cut the hole in the bookmark, I'm just using a tiny cutter, and I'll put a link as to where you can get those in the details below. For the ribbon, I've just used just a pale blue piece of ribbon and some scissors obviously to cut it. For the size of the bookmark, I'm just using a ruler because it's nice, obviously straight edges to draw down, and just choose a size that you want. Make sure it's nice and clean because we're going to put it on top of the clay. At the end, just to sand the edges, just in case it gets a little bit rough, I'm just using a 240 wet dry grit sandpaper, which I just roll up, and then I'll just smooth it along the edge of the piece. We're going to need a sheet of A4 paper. I use a measuring sheet when I'm cutting slices and just working on it. It just makes life easier, but anything along these lines will work, and it's just I've laminated it so it makes it easy to work on. And this one is freely downloadable from www.printablepaper.net. I will bake or cure on a slightly larger tile than normal, and one that's big enough to take the length of the bookmark. And when I bake, I will tent my piece completely in aluminium foil, covering it up and making sure it sort of sits completely over without touching the clay, so that should the oven spike, it protects the clay inside. I work on a large ceramic tile, and I will use biodegradable wet wipes to clean my hands and my equipment as I go, and just some plain tissues just to dry off anything that I've used. And finally, I use a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use to both condition and then to get our nice thin sheets of clay. If you do not have a pasta machine that you can use, then you can simply stack layers of playing cards on either side, and with the roller, roll over to get the size and the height of sheet of clay that you need. So that's it. That's all the equipment we need. So let's move on to the clay. For today's session, I'm using Fimo Soft, but all well-known recognised brands of polymer clay will work equally well for what we're doing today. As you can see, I've got very small amounts, but in a variety of colours. If you've worked with polymer clay before, just use some leftover bits you have. You don't need to take colours straight out of the packet. But for those of you who are completely new to polymer clay, I've done these straight out of the packets, so you can simply buy these colours if you wish to do that. And if you're using one of the other brands, simply choose a similar colour in one of those brands instead. All of these amounts are 7 grams, so these individual larger amounts. So that's 1/16 of a small packet, so as you can see, you don't need very much for what we're doing today. For the background, I would just want very pale colours, so I've gone for the 7 grams of white and then just added a tiny little bit, so about 2 grams. And in this one I've done the brilliant blue, this one's peppermint, and this one's emerald green, and that will give us a lovely blend between those 3 colours for the background of our sea. We've got an extra little piece of white here. This is much more than you need, but just to do an amount, and that's going to create the white sort of wavy lines in the background. For the seaweed or reeds, we've got apple green, lemon yellow and emerald green. For the turtle shells, I've gone for sunflower yellow, cognac, and then Indian red, but I wanted it slightly darker, so I've just added again that sort of 2 grams, tiny amount of some of the chocolate brown. We're going to cover the shell cane in a layer of chocolate brown, and then we're going to build our turtle shell up on a separate layer of chocolate brown. So I've just got, again, 2 separate amounts of the 7 grams there. And then for the rest of the turtle, such as the head, the fins, the tail, etc., we're going to go for cognac, olive green and white, and again 7 grams of each of those. And when I say 7 grams, of course that's also 1/8 of an ounce. First thing to do is to condition all of the clay in their separate amounts, making up the colours of these ones which are going to mix, but the rest just condition as they are. If you're new to conditioning polymer clay, I do have a tutorial, and I'll put a link to that for you for a few hints and tips and techniques on how to condition the polymer clay and why we do it. And we're then going to be doing a blend of those 3, a blend of those 3, blend of those 3, and a blend of those 3. All of those are going to be Skinner blends. So for anyone unused to doing a Skinner blend, again, I do have a tutorial for that, and I'll put a link to that in the details below. And as I said right at the start, you don't have to do anything complex if you want. Just watch through the video, and if you would rather use plain colours where I use blends, just use a plain colour instead. So I'm going to get all of them conditioned. I'll get them conditioned thoroughly in these separate colours, and I'll condition them on setting 3 of my pasta machine. And on my pasta machine, 0 is thick, 9 is thin. And we're going to start with the background, so I'll bring you back when I've got those colours conditioned. Here are my colours all conditioned. So that was the one with the brilliant blue, that was the one with the peppermint, and that was the one with the emerald green. And I've put them through, as I mentioned, on a medium setting of my pasta machine. So that was setting number 3. And we're going to do a Skinner blend with these 3 colours, a straightforward one. So I'm just going to do a diagonal cut down the 2 end pieces and a straight cut down the middle one, and just layer them together. And as always, it doesn't have to be neat, because when it goes through the pasta machine, it will become slightly distorted anyway. So I'm just going to push those pieces together, give them a slight roll, and then I'm going to pull them up and give a press down at the fold, so that when it goes back through the pasta machine, fold first, and I constantly fold it bottom to top. We'll get a nice smooth blend through all the colours. Because I've now got 4 layers, I will put it through on setting 2, which is a thicker setting of my pasta machine, and I'll bring you back when we've got the blend nicely across. So there's our blend nicely done, and I've put it through and let it extend a little bit, so it's gone to about 4 inches or 10 centimetres in length. So having got it to that stage, I'll now put it back through the pasta machine, thin end first, just to extend it longer until it gets to about 6 inches or 15 centimetres in length, because I don't want it any longer than that at the moment. And if you want to have a bookmark that ends up about that length, then you actually need it shorter than that, because at the next stage we're going to lengthen it slightly, and that'll make sense when we get to that stage. So I'll get put through setting number 3, see how that comes out, and then go to setting number 4. So for me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, setting number 4 is about the right length that I want to go to get to the next stage. And also, I'll check at this stage about the width of it. So as I mentioned, I was going to use this as a rough guide, so I already know it's not far off the size I want at the moment, which is brilliant. The next thing we want to do is to create the waves, or the pattern background that makes it look more like a bit of water in the background. And I do this with a cocktail stick, simply to mark in lines which will give me a rough idea, but you don't need to stick to them. And all we're going to do, it's good to sort of start about halfway up to get the idea of this, is I'm just going to do a squiggly line backwards and forwards. And then randomly, just sort of join up in a loop. And you can have small loops or larger loops, but they just need to join in, so they sort of have that look of sort of water and waves. So just keep doing that the whole way up. If you're planning on doing the seaweed or the greenery at one end or both, then obviously you don't need to do this as much down one end, because that'll just mean you're doing something that you're then covering over with the seaweed. But I will still do rough marks, but I just won't pay as much attention, so I'll probably make them slightly bigger and probably leave it at that for that end, and then do the same going down this end. So you end up with something sort of along those lines. Now I say this doesn't have to be exact, and you can change it any way you like when we do the next part of this, but it just gives you guidelines as to where to put the little bits of white. So the next thing we want to do is to get the little bits of white that are going to create the impression of the water. And to do that we take our extra piece of white, and I've got it nicely conditioned just in my hands. I'm going to take off a very small piece, and we're just going to roll this. Now if you do have an extruder, you can make the process slightly easier by extruding some of the clay through the thinnest hole setting you've got in your extruder. You can also, though, if you don't have an extruder, just do it by hand. And even if you do have an extruder, I would then suggest, once you've extruded the clay, to do this extra bit with your hands, because what we're looking for is uneven pieces. So actually that's pretty even, but it doesn't have to be. It also doesn't matter if it breaks off. If you end up with tiny little bits, that's fine. But you see there, that one's slightly more uneven. It goes thin and it goes thicker. And that's the sort of thing we're looking for, because we take those pieces and we're just going to lay them roughly in the grooves of the area which we've marked out. If you've got little bits left over, that's perfect, because you always need little bits to fill in some of the areas or gaps. And just add these pieces along until you fill up all the lines across your piece. And if, like me, your piece is slightly wider than you need, then of course you don't need to worry too much about it going right up to the edges. Now I got a bit ahead of myself and I've done a whole load of the white pieces here, so I can speed up and take you through the process of laying them all in. So I just had a look down, making sure that roughly everything's sort of overlapping and there's no major joins. And then with a nice clean roller, we will just give it a little roll just over the top. And you don't have to be neat, you don't have to keep exactly to where your lines were beforehand, because what we're about to do now is we're about to smudge things. So as I mentioned before, you can do this with a sort of blunt end of a cable needle. You can do it with one of these sort of sculpting tools. But what I like to use is this sort of flat-footed sculpting tool, because it just allows me to push the clay. And all we're going to do is, over every line, we're just going to drag it one way and the other way, because it's like giving that blurring that you get when water moves. It gives it a little sort of shimmery look. I'm not digging in too deeply, I'm just literally sort of pushing it just one way and the other. If you get little bits that fall off, that's absolutely fine, just smush those in. The more uneven it is, the more natural it looks. And you can just spread the bits over and just work your way up and across the whole piece, just smushing all the little white areas of clay in one direction and then another. Okay, so we've done all that. And you'll you're thinking, wow, that looks like a bit of a mess. However, give it a bit of a roll over just to get all those clay pieces in. And now we're going to put it back through the pasta machine. So the first thing to do is just to gently get it off your sheet. And now we want to make it slightly longer and slightly thinner. And I want to put it back through the pasta machine, but of course I don't want any dirt going on this whatsoever. So the way I'm going to do that is by using some A4 paper. So I'm going to put my piece either side of 2 sheets of paper and put it back down through with one end first, going that way into the pasta machine. However, I'm not going to press it against the paper because obviously the clay will expand and the paper won't, so it will come up and over the top. So you want it as close to this edge to start with as you can get. And I'm going to put it back through the same setting that I had it on. So for me that's setting number 4. Just make sure it's nice and straight, so it's going to sit between the 2 pieces of paper. It tends to do that and sort of curl around, but that's absolutely fine. So we'll now have a look at it, see what size we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's about the length that I want for my bookmark, and actually it's about the thickness as well. So that is absolutely fine for what we are planning to do. So I'll remove it from the paper and I will start to put it on the tile that we're going to work on. So I've got a nice flat surface with this on the tile from this point onwards. And again, with a nice clean roller, just start at one end and roll it nicely down so you know there's no air bubbles trapped underneath as we work from this point onwards. I'm going to very roughly trim off just a little bit wider so that I know the area roughly that I'm going to be working in. Otherwise there is a tendency to put things on way outside your area and then you end up cutting off a lot of the pattern. And we'll just roughly neaten off top and bottom. So that'll be the main length of our bookmark, and as I said I will be doing it so that the seaweed starts from the blue side going up, so I'm not too worried that there wasn't much white going down there. So the next thing to do then is to move on to the seaweed. So with seaweed we're just going to do another straightforward skinner blend from the apple green, the lemon yellow and the emerald green, and as you see I've put them in very rough oblong shapes, and as before diagonal cut across the end, straight cut across the middle, push them together, little roll, fold in half, put in a little point at the crease, and then we'll put it back through in the pasta machine. I'm going to put this through on setting number 2 again till I get the nice smooth blend, but I don't want it much wider than this. So that's probably about 2.5 inches, about sort of 7 centimetres, something like that. So I'll keep it that way by when I'm putting it through the pasta machine, making sure I push it nicely up against the edge of the pasta machine so that each time it doesn't spread out too long. So I'll bring you back when we've got that nice blend done. So there's our blend all done. And the reason I did the lemon yellow in the middle is because the emerald green can be quite strong, and if I'd just done the emerald green and the apple would have had virtually no apple left and it would all gone to the darker green, but putting the lemon yellow in the middle just gives it that nice soft graduation from one colour to the next. And all I'm going to do now is we want very nice thin pieces in order to make our seaweed from. So I'm going to put it through that way on the pasta machine on my lowest usable setting. So for me that's setting number 9, but use whichever is the thinnest one on your pasta machine. It won't shred or tear the clay. So there we go, nice long thin sheet of polymer clay, and all we're going to do is with your craft knife cut off one end in sort of like a swirly pattern, and then with the point at the green end just do, I tend to do about 3 at a time, so tapering from the green end down out to the darker end, and then picking them up you can lay them on your background. Now the first couple I will place on relatively high, and you can actually curl and change the shape of them as you go down. I'm not worried about it not going to the bottom, because we're going to get other ones in front of that which will completely hide the fact that it's not at the bottom. And just alternate where they are. They can cross over each other. See, that one's actually twisted on itself as well. And just continue doing that, cutting them off. Say, I recommend in groups of 3s. Do them as thick as you want down the bottom, or make them thinner. Some of the later ones I do will be much thinner. And just build it up till you've covered over all the bottom. And then the very last ones you add on, you'll notice that I go right off the bottom, so it's just the little bits of the lighter green showing on our finished piece. I'm not about to put this back through the pasta machine, but we have got quite a lot of thickness of clay here, so I've gone over and over these bottom pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out and then roll it quite a lot harder as we get down to the bottom, so we reduce the thickness at the bottom. Don't worry about it spreading out, that's completely natural. Okay, so that's the seaweed done, and because it's going off the bottom of the tile, I'm just going to chop that bit off for now, just to make it easier for me to work on. So that's the seaweed done, that's the background water done, so all we need to do now is to start on the actual turtles. The actual turtle shell is quite straightforward. We're going to do, again, a skinner blend. So this is going to be from the sunflower yellow to the cognac, and this is that mixture of the Indian red with a little bit of the chocolate brown. I've also got that little piece of chocolate brown which we're going to cover around the outside in a minute. If you don't want to do a skinner blend, then of course you can simply just do a plug of coloured clay and choose whichever colour you want to do. Exactly the same before, diagonally across the end pieces, straight down the centre, and I'm not worried that that piece is bigger than the other two, because as we know, when we do the skinner blend, it also comes out in the pasta machine and evens itself up. So as before, I've put the pinch in where the fold is, put it back through setting 2, because I've got the 4 layers of my clay now, and I'll bring you back when we've got that blend through on those 3 colours. So when you've got the blend roughly done, and you don't need to go all the way through to it's a completely smooth blend for this, if yours has gone longer and thinner, then just keep it on the same size, because mine's gone quite, because mine was still quite short but quite wide. I'm just going to fold it in 2. I'm going to put it back through on setting number 2, that way to give myself a longer, thinner piece. And now I'm going to go down to the thinnest usable setting on my pasta machine, which, as I mentioned, is setting 9 on my machine, to give myself as long and thin a piece as I can. As I mentioned before, if you know that your machine shreds or tears your clay, then go down to your thinnest usable setting. Having got our thin strip of clay, all we're going to do is roll it up from the yellow end, nice and tight, making sure there's no air bubbles as you go. And then chop down into quarters. It doesn't matter if they're even, because what we're going to do is making a turtle shell, and if they're slightly uneven, that is absolutely fine for what we're doing. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the brown slightly round the sides. I normally do that flat on the tile, but do it however you want to. Do 2 pieces and press them together just at the bottom. Same with the other 2. 4 pieces together, and then holding them upright, we're going to change this sort of weird shape into more of a diamond shape. So we're just going to press in down either edge. So effectively you're using your fingers like that, so we're going to create a nice diamond shape the whole way down the length, because once we've done that we can start reducing this as what is effectively a square cane. But before we do that, we need to cover it with a layer of the dark brown, so making sure that your clay is wider than the piece you've got. I'm going to put it back through my pasta machine, again on that thinnest usable setting, which on my machine is setting number 9. And we can now chop our piece the right size, neaten off one end, and then just cover all around the outside of this piece with the darker layer of brown. Chop off where it overlaps. And that is our turtle patterned back cane done. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to reduce this smaller by simply pressing in along one side, working from one end to the other until it gets long and thin enough for what we want to do. So I'm hoping to put 2 turtles on this particular bookmark for you. As you saw at the beginning, on the other ones I've done just 1, and as you saw from the different sizes, you can do whatever size you like, but to do 2 I'm going to have to go quite small. So once I get to a certain size, probably about 4 inches 10 centimetres in length, I'm going to chop it in half. You get to see what the pattern is there, so you can see that's the turtle shell pattern, which when we start to build that up will give that nice pattern. And I'm only going to reduce a part of this down. So again, I'll keep going, keep pressing in with my fingers on the tile, making it longer and thinner. And when I get to about the same length, so again about that 4 inches 10 centimetres, once again I will chop it in half, and then I will work on just one piece until I get it really, really small. And the size I'm going for today is less than one of these small squares, so it's probably about a 1/6 of an inch, or probably about half a centimetre in size. Once I've got it quite small, I will often work on it off the tile because it's easier then to turn around and manipulate in your hands. And I'll continue doing that until I've got it to the right size, and I'll bring you back when I've got it down to the size I need. Okay, so once I've got it down to that size, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the yellow towards me, and I'm just going to flatten off ever so slightly the top and bottom points, just to make it more of a shape of the little turtle shell pieces. And then we are going to cut 13 slices. Now you want to cut them as thin as you can, because obviously we want to keep our bookmark fairly thin, and we're going to lay them on to a piece of the chocolate brown clay. So this is the extra piece of chocolate brown that we had, and again I'm going to put this down on the thinnest setting of my pasta machine, so on my machine it's setting number 9. And there are enough to do 2 turtles in that, so I've put one piece to one side, kept one piece out, and we will start to make our turtle. So 13 thin slices. And then we're going to have 5 down the middle, and I'm going to put the yellow towards the top. And then 4 at a time. Go in between and down the outside. Okay, I'm not worried that it's not overly the shape of the turtle at the moment. That's not a problem at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep part of that to one side because, as I said, I'm going to be doing a second turtle with it. So take a little bit of your leftover piece and we're going to squash it really quite flat because we need that outer rim of the shell. Don't want it too wide, so just press it in a little bit more again. So I'm just pressing that way and then I'm pressing flat, and we really want it quite flat. Okay, something along those lines. You need to cut as many slices as will fit around the outside. I work on the basis of I'll cut 12, I may only need 10. So again, as thin a slice as you can get. And then take the slices, I'm working from the bottom of the tail upwards. Just put them around the outside. Curl them in. So they go around the outside of your piece. Up to the top. Now I usually have them going round to the top but not quite over the top piece. That was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so I would only have needed 10. And then work from the other side up, doing the same on the other side. Okay, and that is the turtle shell pattern complete. So what we're going to do now is we're going to give it a bit of a roll. And then we're going to cut around the outside of the pattern. And you can go in and create slight curls around the outside of that rim you've put. That gives you more of a turtle shell shape. Pull off the excess brown clay. Carefully take the shell up, and at this stage you can change the shape of it. You can just pull ever so gently, push it in. For instance, I want that bit to go down slightly, this bit to come out, that bit to come out, and you can just, as I say, just change the shape of it ever so slightly by pushing and pulling until you have the size and shape of turtle shell that you want. So I'm going to get another one of those done now, and then the last thing we need to do is to do the head and the tail and the legs and flippers. Okay, so we're nearly there. What have we got left to do? Oh yes, another skinner blend. This one we're going to go from the white to the olive green to the cognac. The olive green just helps add a little something into the colour blend. I've tried it with just the green, and I've tried it with just the cognac. Really doesn't work, but to have the mixture of the white with one of these dark greens into the brown just looks slightly better to my mind. As before, just put it together, diagonals on the ends, straight down the middle, fold over, pinch down, put back through, crease first, until we've got the nice blend from one end to the other. Once you've got the blend, we're going to do exactly the same as we did for the turtle shell. Press down to give yourself half the length, back through the pasta machine on setting number 2, and then back through on that thinnest usable setting to give yourself a nice long strip. And this time we're going to roll it from the brown on the inside towards the white on the outside. Exactly the same, nice and tight with no air bubbles. And once it's done, I'm just going to press it in, and we're going to pull this till it's really nice and long. So I'm just pressing it in, give it a roll, and when I've got it to about 4 inches, 10 centimetres, I'm just going to take off probably just over, just over an inch, so probably sort of about 2.5, 3 centimetres. And for the rest of this, we're going to create the nice mottled, slightly random pattern on the flippers and tail and legs of the turtle. And we're going to do this by keeping one end relatively large, and I'm just concentrating and tapering off the other end till it goes quite thin. And then I'm just going to cut off, make it so it's sort of right sort of length on my measuring sheet. It doesn't matter, I'm just doing it to make sure I've got enough pieces the right size. I'm going to chop off 1 inch or 2.5 centimetre pieces. And then put them together randomly. So some of the bigger ones, tiny pieces, larger one, small, until they've all gone together. Then I'm just going to squidge them, that of course is the technical term, until they're all formed together, until I've got to a piece that's probably about a couple of inches, 5 centimetres in length, and then I can just chop that in half. And I'm just going to put randomly, so they're not matching, put the two pieces together. And that is all we need to do, just create that slightly mottled effect. Now, obviously you could spend a lot longer on it, but for what we're going to do, that's all we need today. So I'm just pushing it in, almost sort of like that diamond shape again, but slightly longer. And then I'm just pressing down on one side to flatten off one side, and then I'll pull the other side slightly longer because we're going to do the large curved flippers at the top to start with. So let's just chop off to see what we've got. That's not too bad a shape, but we need to have a look at the size. Actually, that's not too bad a size. And I'm going to cut 4 thin slices, but have them thick enough that I can do a little bit of manipulation if I need. So they're probably that sort of size, they're about 1 millimetre, I think, something along those lines, because then you've got enough that you can actually just change the shape slightly and just curl them more. And what I will normally do at this stage is just very roughly put them down, so they're not actually in position, but they roughly are, so I can check the size and shape of things for what I am doing. As I said, I've got 2, so there's my other one. So they're not actually sticking in, or sticking to each other, so I will have a chance to move them when I get to put them on the actual bookmark. But I know I've got my pieces roughly the right size. And the bottom, or the feet and the tail is quite simple. In fact, I'm going to use this little cut-off piece that I had at the end. I'm just going to make it slightly smaller still. Still sort of doing that same shape. Slightly rounded at one end. Let me show you. So that sort of shape, because I can take thin slices of that. So sort of about like that, and again that same sort of thickness, but this time putting 2 together, so I've got a matching pair. Whichever one's the more rounded piece, just chop that off. And they will be feet at the back. And then, still stuck to my hand. And then the little pointed piece, you can just point slightly more, and that can be the tail. And then I'll repeat that for the other one. And for the head, we'll go back to that piece we chopped off. And I'm just going to reduce this down by pressing it in and then rolling it. And I'll reduce this down until it's about 7 inches, or I think it's probably about 17.5 centimetres, because I want to cut off 7 pieces. 6, 7, okay. And again, just chopping them off about 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres long. And then this time, actually putting them round, so I've got 1 in the middle, and the other 6 go around the outside. And I was going to press them in just slightly. And then we want a slightly elongated shape, so I'm going to pull up one end just slightly. That'll be the nose. And then we'll have a cut through, see what we've got. So that sort of looks turtle-like. And then we'll just have a look at the size of the head. I think I want them just slightly bigger, so to make it slightly bigger I'm just going to press down, and I'm actually reducing the height, and that makes the bottom bit slightly bigger. Have a look at the size of that one. So it's just a case of trial and error for your own turtles. So I'm happier with that size. I'm just going to change the shape slightly, make sure it's neater for what I want. And then cut 2 pieces. And then if you happen to have a little leftover cut-off piece, you can just push that quite thin. Take a couple of slices, and that can be the neck coming out of the body of the turtle, which the head will then fit on. So that's the piece for that one. And all we need to do now is to add those pieces onto our bookmark, and then we can finish our piece. So the first thing I'm going to do is remind myself of my margins. Might even just very gently just do a little score mark so that I know exactly where I need to fit my turtles in. And then I'll put the bodies just roughly in place to start with. Let's have him going that way. And let's have him coming down. So let's see if we can have him coming down that way. And once I've got them on, then I will start adding the piece on by just gently lifting the shell up, putting the other pieces in place. But I'm not pressing anything in, and I'm aware of where these lines are. I'm not worried about his flipper going over the top and being cut off. That'll be fine. And once I've got the pieces roughly put in place and I'm happy with the design, so let's have a look. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Then I will gently lift off the shell, keeping all the pieces in place. And just where these pieces will go under the shell, I'm just going to very gently just roll just the end of them, just to sort of smush them under slightly. And the same here with the head and the neck, so the head attaches to the neck and then the neck presses down, so that when that shell sits over, there's no gaps anywhere. And I can also very gently, just around the edge of the shell, just sort of round that off and press it in slightly. And then I can make sure that all the pieces are sat nicely down onto the underneath. And I'll repeat with this one. I'm not worried about eyes particularly, but I will just put a little bit of an indent in the sides of the heads just to give the impression of eyes. And that's us about done. So the last thing to do is to take my nice clean ruler, place it gently on top, and then using my tissue blade, just smoothly run down the sides. Take away the excess. Make sure it's nice and square, top and bottom. And then we'll just add a little hole at the top to put the ribbon in. I'll use the ruler to make sure I get the hole in the right place. If you want to, either by hand or with a little cutter, just round off the edges. And our piece is ready to bake. Once it's ready for baking, then I will use a large piece of aluminium foil that goes underneath the towel right over the top, and then I'll crinkle around the top to create almost like a tent sitting well above the clay, so it's not pressing into the clay at any point, but it gives a little bit of extra protection should the oven spike in temperature, and it protects the clay from burning. The other thing I will do is I will bake for much longer than the instructions from the manufacturers. So for something like this, to make sure it's lovely and flexible when we finished baking, I will bake it for about an hour. If you ever need any further tips, details, instructions, or just general information on baking or curing polymer clay, then nip across to the Blue Bottle Tree, which is Ginger Davis Orman's wonderful website. She's got loads of articles, and I'll put a link to the baking ones underneath this tutorial for you as well. So all I've got to do now is get this baked and bring it back, add a little ribbon, and it's all ready and done. Once the piece was cooled from the oven, I just removed it from the tile, rolled up a piece of wet dry sandpaper, which was 240 grit, just gently sanded around the edges to make sure it's nice and smooth, and added a length of ribbon in the top. And there we are. That is our turtle bookmark, all finished and ready to use, with a nice amount of flexibility, but thin enough to use as a bookmark. And of course you can always do the one with just a bigger turtle by itself, or with just a smaller turtle, however many you want to do, and whatever shape and size you want to do them. So that's it. That's the tutorial for today finished. A nice fun one to do, some little turtles swimming on a bookmark. And of course you can use this for loads of other pieces. You can just make a turtle pendant or little turtle earrings, use it to decorate the front of a book cover, whatever you want to do. It's just good fun, so experiment and enjoy. As always, thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to those of you who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. That's it for now. I need to come up with something for the next tutorial, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Bye.